Welcome back to the last session on opportunities in science and science journalism, which asks the question of where are the jobs, where are the students, where are the teachers, how do we advertise what happens in science and in science journalism to a larger audience. So the panelists here are Shreya Ghosh of India Bioscience. We have Professor Nalini Rajan from down the road, the Asian College of Journalism. We have M. Sai Baba from NIAS in Bangalore, and Professor Shrikant Shastri from the Jain Center. So can I invite them to come up to the dais, and Professor Nalini Rajan will handle the panel.
So, frankly, I just have to tell you I'm slightly bewildered at being here in this forum because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a science writer, I'm not a science journalist. In fact, I come from a completely different discipline, economics and philosophy. And the funny thing is that, you know, when you talk about economics and philosophy and subjects like these, you find that one of the things, you know, one of my teachers used to say that as you get older, the sign of a mature philosopher, the sign of a mature economist is to say maybe and never yes or no. It's very hard to talk about facts in the humanities. So this is, you know, the subject today is where are the jobs, what about the teachers, and what about the students in science. I teach at the Asian College of Journalism. In terms of the jobs, right in the beginning when we started the college, I think there were a few science journals of repute. And as we, you know, as time goes by, we find that, you know, we are very encouraged that we do have among our alumni several science journalists quite distinguished. Nevertheless, it is true that, you know, when we look at the columns now, it's very hard to see. You sometimes see the blurring between, you know, boundaries between science writing and you see healthcare. Is it health? Is it about health? Is it about environment? What exactly is science writing? Those boundaries are blurred, and it becomes harder and harder to understand, you know, where the jobs are for our students. As far as the students are concerned, you know, we are a journalism school, and I think you did have a panel on balance and so on. The problem is, you know, when you teach journalists, teach students to be journalists, we talk about balance. If you're covering a communal riot, we say, you know, you have to talk to everyone. There are two sides to the story. Maybe sometimes there are multiple sides to a story. If you're covering a strike, and that's more rare as time goes by, but if you're covering a labor strike, the laborers striking work, you also have to speak to the management. That's balance. And that's not what happens in science. The way you do science is very, very different from what we teach journalists. The challenge is, we over time, I think, have realized that science journalism is a very different ball game. Finally, teachers of science. And we've had the biggest problem trying to retain teachers of science. We've had what should teachers teach students? Should they teach them to be journalists, or should they teach them to be scientists? I'm sure you've been talking about this earlier. You talked about storytelling. You talked about the fact that, you know, there's this illusions of understanding, approximations to a certain kind of mental approximations in terms of knowledge, learning, and so on. I think that's where the challenge lies. And to discuss all these three issues, we have with us three very distinguished panelists. And I shall begin by asking Dr. Shreya Ghosh to give her thoughts on this.
Thank you. So there are three questions up on the slide behind me. Where are the jobs, where are the students, and where are the teachers? And I'm going to take these a little out of order. I'll start with the question of where are the students? And the answer is they're everywhere. Every month we receive requests from people who say, I want to write about science. And most often these are students with a background in science, those who feel excited about their science and they want to communicate this excitement to the public. And so the answer to where are the students is that they're everywhere, they're willing to learn. When it comes to the second question, where are the teachers, things get a little trickier. There are good courses and schools of journalism available, but there are very few dedicated courses for science journalism in this country. There are a few workshops that occur annually or biannually. India Bioscience is organizing one later this year with British Council and IISA Pune. But these are limited in their capacity. And what ends up happening for most of us who are scientists turned science writers or journalists is that we end up learning on the job. And there's a problem here, and that problem is science journalism is not just gathering information and facts and putting it into words. And this many people don't realize. And when you learn on the job without a good team of mentors around you, what tends to happen is that certain things get left out. And these are often things like journalistic principles, journalistic ethics, and this is where someone coming from a journalistic background would probably have an advantage, but there are proportionately fewer of them. And I would actually like to urge in this audience, every one of you who are established journalists, please take some time out to mentor young new writers who want to get into this field, but who do not have the necessary resources to gain that understanding of what being a journalist means, what your priorities, what your focus should be. Finally, coming to the, I guess, trickiest question of where are the jobs? What it boils down to, in my opinion, in the end, is funding. In an ideal scenario, every university, and I'm going to club communication and journalism together in this answer. So in an ideal world, every university, every institute should have a dedicated press cell with a press team, which acts as a liaison between the public and the scientist. Every national or regional newspaper or news channel or agency should have a dedicated science editor with a team working under them. And the reason these are not, we can talk about the reasons why these are not in practice today. And when it comes to institutes, there needs to be specific funds allocated for that press team to take place, or when it comes to newspapers that are privately funded, it boils down to profitability. Is science sellable? And I think it boils down to, is it worth investing in science journalism and science communication? And in my opinion, the answer should be yes, it is worth investing into. Coming to what the scenario is today in the country, is there, if you want to be a science writer or a science journalist, is there work to be had? Yes, definitely. There are many agencies, there's Gubbi Labs, we are always happy to receive pitches, The Wire works with a lot of freelancers, and this is the age of the internet. If you have a good story, you want to write about it, you don't need to wait for permission, create a blog and put it up there. So is there work to be had if you are passionate? Yes, there is. Are there enough full-time, well-paying, salaried jobs to be had in this field? Not enough. And I know there are plenty of people in this audience who are doing this out of pure passion and would continue to do so even with very little monetary compensation. But we need to keep thinking about how many bright, talented, good journalists are we excluding because they simply cannot afford to continue like that. So they cannot afford to not get living wages. And what can you as public, as members of the public, do for it? There are little steps: donate to The Wire, subscribe to your favorite magazine, help in whatever way you can. And if you want to talk about, write about science, just go ahead and do it, is what I'd say.
Yeah, good afternoon. And it's always two sides of being part of the panel, the last for the 2 days. The best part of it is that you're soaked into the topic and everything has been discussed. A lot of things have been thrown and you are ready for newer ideas. But the difficult part is that, it's the last session. You may be wondering when it will be over and move on. Keeping that in mind, I thought I should think about it. But then maybe it's a very a pertinent topic for taking the science communication forward, and very nicely worded the theme, opportunities in science per se to be discussed. What would happen is that you look around, some idea excites you, you start researching on that, and then write papers, and then create your thesis, and then a fraction of it, out of all these thoughts, and a fraction of it gets converted into engineering, much fraction of it gets into technology, and that's where it gets connected to the society. But then it doesn't end there. Then you have to answer further questions, and the cycle would continue. The challenge is when the research is going on, and how that connected to the society is what you have to bring awareness about that to the people, and that is the challenge of communicating science that is happening here. And today, all of us agree that the way our education system is going on, the way people are pursuing their studies, that not many people are coming to the science stream. So that is a challenge which all of us have to address, where I think the country like ours has the disadvantage of not having input from the other countries. The Western countries are compensating this by having the best minds going there and then compensating. So this is a challenge which we have to address when we think about science. Now we're talking about science journalism, and when it comes to journalism, you always work under the pressure of reporting on time. Maybe when it comes to science journalism, it has to be looked at in a different platform, different way it has to be done. In fact, very nicely coined the word, it's a peacetime effort. I don't know who said in one of the panels, it's a peacetime effort where preparatory work has to be done. And that is where I think when you get into journalism and when you want to do science journalism, you have to differentiate between science reporting, science writing, or science communicating. And these three, the facets of science communication has to be realized. Maybe easiest thing is to do the science reporting. Something's happened, and then that would interest to the students or interest to the readers. But then when you want to communicate, a lot of homework has to be done. I recall, I don't know if Pallav is there in the audience or not, one of the themes which he showed on the thing is the heat-resistant material developed in ISRO, where he just showed on other side of it, you have 2000 degrees. This side, you can touch it. That is the type of developmental work that has happened. And these are the type of snippets we have to bring to the knowledge of the people before they become an issue. I think we have to be honest and say that such type of efforts are not happening. And we only pick up things which are becoming controversial and then start working on that. I think this is one thing which will go into the science journalism. Now the question of jobs, I think Shreya rightly pointed out, job, are you looking for making living job or looking for your satisfaction? And coming from a developing country, most of us want a job which you can also make living out of it. I think there's one radical change that has to happen in our system is that lateral switching from one career to another career, which doesn't happen, unfortunately, in our society. It is possible that you have joined some job, made money, now explore yourself and move laterally to some other job, and it could be your passion to do science. I think I said yesterday I was mentioning briefly that there's a triangle for us. You are yourself, your profession, and your beliefs. It is somehow perceived that just because you're a scientist, you are everything of it. I think there is a different facet to your life that of being individual, your belief systems. And for that matter, very rarely you are choosing a profession because you are suited for it. Let's all admit for it. I think you take up a profession, and some of us somehow try to excel in that profession and then say you are that. So this we have to take into consideration. That is more applicable to science also. In fact, jokingly in atomic energy, we call ourselves as scientific officers. They're not the scientists. So we said it's maybe appropriately worded as scientific officers. So this is one aspect we have to consider, that you are a scientist not because you are qualified to be scientist. In terms of rationalism, in terms of thinking. that will be applicable to the journalists and science journalists. Maybe you're asked to write and then you become a science journalism and you may excel also. I'm not saying that the persons who choose the profession, whether you are suitable or not, we are doing well. I'm not saying that you're not doing, yes, you do well. But this internalization of the issues would start showing up when a controversy comes or when an issue would come. So this is one issue when we have to consider about the science journalism. So when it comes to job, that's why you have to think, you start moving laterally, then you're not worried about your living, then maybe you will explore, you will be there. So this is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that the way we are communicating is changing for a period of time. We used to look for newspaper anxiously. If you want to read about what happened yesterday test match, you would like to see in the newspaper. Now you're the last thing you do in the newspaper because it's already there. It is there on your mobile, it's there. So the way we are communicating is changing. Newer facets of communications are becoming available, and hence that opens up opportunity for us to explore those things. Now I'm audible. Yeah, I'm just talking about the newer facets of communication that are becoming available, and this would open up job opportunities in the sense that you need to master the technology, and then you need to make use of it to reach to the people. I know that she is very busily tweeting. From yesterday onwards, you would have seen that she is very busily tweeting. So that means you are reaching it out, and so that is where I think we need to learn to make a shift in way we work, in terms of not only one job you do at a time, maybe you do multiple jobs, and one of them could be science communication. It can be a job. I think so that would become make living out of it. Nothing wrong in it. Write an article, make money, tweet and get some. I hope she gets paid for these tweets, and then we have to do that part of it. I think so. This is where I think the jobs per se, the conventional or traditional thinking of doing jobs has to be changed. Of course, whatever I'm talking is not applicable specifically to science journalism. It is applicable to all jobs if we're doing it. I think as a society, we are the people who do minimum changes. And I worked for an organization for 37 years, and now I wondered why I worked for 37 years, because at that time I thought the best job. I'm sure that, so we have a traditional people of sticking to something, not exploring ourselves. So this change would help us to get the jobs. The bigger challenge is the teachers. I think, this is where I think if you go to any school system, and I think we start learning things in the primary school. And that is the place where we have the biggest problem of the people who taking that profession to be a primary teacher, just because most of the time it is because they don't have other opportunities. So that means you just see our beginning, where it is and how it is. So this teacher's issue has to be addressed on a priority, whatever domain we are talking to. And now that we are talking about science communication, I think we should see there must be a lot of journalism schools where our chairperson is coming from. And there are a lot of media training schools are there across the country. I think they have to adopt it. And this adoption is to say that when you want to communicate science, it is going to be different than what you have to report tomorrow. A news which is more than few hours old is not worth publishing on the newspaper, I think. So this is the life. Now it is not hours, it's a question of minutes. I think if it event is happening today and you don't report it in the next hour, it is no more a news for the current social media will be there. So the question is, how do we train people, how do we train the teachers so that they adopt these newer facets that are becoming available? And you first have to get trained because they are coming later. And now if you want me to use Twitter, I have to be very careful. I have to use the Facebook, I have to be careful because the newer facets are coming. So that newer facets training and how it can be utilized for communicating, it will be there. Of course, we also have to be very conscious that our society still depends on newspaper to get information. In spite of all the media which is coming, all the modes which are available, still people depend on newspapers. More so when you go to the villagers or semi-urban domain. So what you write in those things becomes very important. In fact, in the panel discussion about the communicating science in the vernacular, I thought this point would be discussed. The importance of communicating will be there. I think so. So we have a challenge for us, be it the way we teach science communication. The students who would come, happy to know that a lot of people are applying and they want to become science communicators. But the question is that how many of them really get transformed into contributing to on a continuous basis? I think this is something which we have to worry about it. And then the question of funding, doing workshops. You see, the problem is, just like poetry writing is an art, good science communicating is also an art. I know very nicely Guhaji mentioned that about how nicely you can open the text to attract people, because it's, let us accept it. Somebody will say science is for intelligentsia. In fact, stereotyping it was told, it is meant for people highly intelligent, and this is not for me. I'm a common man. This thought process is to be taken into consideration when you are communicating science. And this is where I think we have to think. So to me, the question seemed to be not where are the jobs. I think for me, who are the people who would like to take up these challenges and then do that part of it. So I would like to stop at this place here.
Dr. Shastri.
Thank you. So I'll start out by making a few remarks which are a little bit off script, but as the last person to say something half organized in this two-day program, I would like to sort of raise the question of what are concrete takeaways from all the discussions that we had in the last 2 days, because this is certainly the first meeting that I have attended where there has been a fairly intense sort of interface between the community that I belong to, which is scientists and people who write about science. And it sort of is happening at an interesting and exciting time where sort of the reportage and writing about science is on an upward curve in the country. And so it's a very, very nice time to be having these discussions. But yesterday, Vijay Raghavan cautioned us about, how, I don't remember what he said on stage, but at some point he sort of pointed out to this fact that a lot of people in this room had a clear understanding of what the issues were. But then there wasn't enough talk about what we were going to do about them. So I think it's sort of good to take away at least a few points of what we could do to sort of take the situation from where it is to a better place. And in order to sort of address that concretely and also address the theme of this particular session a little bit more concretely, I'd like to take up I'd like to mention a few things that are sort of being considered and contemplated at the Indian Academy of Sciences. As it was mentioned a couple of times, there is at least a sort of a renewed interest in recent times and understanding that the scientific bodies in the country must play a role in engaging with the public and in various ways. So a concrete sort of step in that direction was the creation of a new journal called Dialogue, which was mentioned earlier by Amitabh and Sutit, and a web platform, Confluence, that many of us are involved with. There's also an additional component to this, which is the holding of outreach programs, such as this one. So one thing I want to concretely request all of you to think about and sort of get back to me, get back to the organizers, is what are the kind of interesting sort of activities that we as a scientific community can be taking to sort of reach the broader public and fellow professionals in allied disciplines such as science journalism. So I want to make a request that anybody who has concrete ideas, please get back to me. This is something that we want to take forward seriously. and the other thing that is being sort of discussed, it's a little bit more amorphous at this stage, is the idea that we will hold sort of training programs in science communication, journalism, science writing, intended for science students who may be interested in this direction. The sort of the conceptualization of this is not anywhere near, well, like I said, it's at the very beginning stages. So anybody, again, who has input to us on what is useful to do, who are the people who could potentially be sort of people who are going to sort of impart that training, and any ideas you have on what is it useful for, and therefore how does that idea shape the programs to be envisaged. So any input at all that you have, I would like you to get back to me, and this will be one concrete way of taking the discussion here forward from my perspective. So the other thing has been mentioned a couple of times, but is this idea of having sort of a compendium of sort of a list of scientists who are willing to talk to the journalists at times when their expertise is of any use. Now, there was a cautionary note about this from Vasudevan Mukund, which was not to proliferate these kind of resources, and that's actually a warning that should probably be taken into account in a broader sense. So, for example, as Shreya mentioned, sort of training students or anybody interested for science writing is something that's already being undertaken for some time through their initiative. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that proliferation of these efforts is not a problem, but these efforts working in isolation or worse at cross purposes might be. And so we have to find ways of working together. And again, if there are concrete ways of pursuing that, that we want to discuss and put into effect, that would be actually very useful. And in terms of where the prospective careers or jobs are, so basically there's sort of three kinds of occupations that have been discussed during the last 2 days, where somebody could be engaged in science communication. One is if you're a working scientist but takes an active role and interest in communicating science. And there you're really not so much creating a new job, a new sort of opportunity to be employed, but you're redefining a career profile. So you're redefining what a working scientist is expected to be doing, and this is what Raghavendra Gadakar emphasized, and I think that's certainly part of the story. So that will partly address the question of, if I take some considerable number of students and train them in scientific writing and journalism, what are they going to do? One answer to this is some of them could go on and become working scientists that they might have otherwise, but with this added dimension to their sort of working personae, where they're also in the business of communicating science. And the other obvious career path is to become a science journalist. And here, I don't have a very good sense of how large the employment, the pool of employment opportunities is. I hope it grows, because certainly if you take into account also communicating science in Indian languages, I think it's a considerable, as Sai Baba mentioned, there's enough work to do, right? So the question is really whether all of that work is also going to be attached with a salary and a career. That I hope happens, but I don't have a good sense for this. But the third possible career path that was mentioned is somebody to be housed in a university or a research institution, but be responsible for communicating to the outside world about what's going on there. And I think this is sort of a fairly clearly desirable occupation and a component of our universities and institutions, and most of us are not doing very well in this regard, okay? A part of it is also, it is a new thing, in research institutes and government employment, things move a bit slowly, so this is sort of still, even though it's not very new, it's a relatively new idea, so we have to find ways in which we can make an argument that this is really important, and I think that's something that those of us who are in the business of sort of research in science can take up and do. And that is if you look at sort of what the potential size of that employment market is, it's very large. So if you cross the threshold where you make the case that this is a necessary part of the activity of all the universities and research institutes, I think the number of possibilities will explode. It's probably going to happen very suddenly, and I'm not sure what's the best strategy is to be prepared for that eventuality, because then if suddenly these jobs open up, you're going to find yourself woefully short of trained people who can take up those possibilities. So I think it's worth sort of thinking about that scenario through, right? That if you do make this advocacy for having sort of in-house science communicators, and if you, at the point that you do succeed in convincing people, are you going to have enough people to fill all the positions? So that's what I wanted to say. I'll stop there. So there was sort of one somewhat unrelated thing that I want to mention. There was some discussion about getting all the old issues of some Tamil magazine, right? Somebody, I think Peer Muhammad mentioned. So this is actually an interesting thing that's waiting to be done. So again, at the Indian Academy of Sciences, there's been some discussion about building up a repository of documents and books and resources electronically, which have broadly to do with science and Indian. So that's a very large scope. And anybody who has sort of interesting things that should be housed should sort of contact us. And again, this is something that is probably being done in many places, and it probably needs to be done in many places. But the important thing is, therefore, then that all of these places are in contact with each other and are functionally networked. So with that, let me stop. Thank you.
Before I open the floor to questions, just a couple of comments. Some of these things, as an outsider, bit of an outsider, what I notice is that the anxiety that we feel today, there's a bit of an anxiety about communicating science to the public. And I think I understand it because, but you know, historically, if you look at it, the Nehruvian era, for instance, you had this, you know, these things don't happen in a vacuum, but during the Nehruvian era, you had people talking about inculcating, the government was talking about inculcating a scientific temper. And I know that within my family, my sister studied science talent program. There were all these programs, and now we are suddenly practically on the other side of the spectrum, where science itself is being questioned, and rationality. I mean, you know, you're talking about rationality, and you're talking about rationalists coming under attack. And perhaps this is the best time to have this seminar and to have this. I mean, it doesn't happen accidentally, that we've been there for a few years, just on the other street, you know, the Asian College of Journalism. And to make this contact with this institution, a premier science institution here, to make this contact and to say that, yes, we need to talk to each other. And even a seminar of this kind, I feel it's probably come at absolutely the right time. Yeah. So we could open the floor to questions, and anybody, yeah, the young lady there, the young woman who raised her.
No, let me just start with, before I get to it, one question that's come by SMS. I think this is Professor Sai Baba's colleague who's been watching us on the live stream. That is about an association of Indian science journalists. How will that help budding students and enthusiasts like us who are just joining, and can a forum be made out of it? So that's one question. Would you like to take a bunch of questions and then try to answer them together?
So my name is Meera. I run a non-profit media organization. So I have a very fundamental question about science journalism. And in fact, this question may be applicable beyond science journalism. Where is the money, right? Now, for-profit, commercial, mainstream media has their own constraints. So unless there is a story which is going to get 1 million views, or the book is going to be a bestseller, editors are not going to commission. They have their own, you know, pressures. On the non-profit side, unless there is a grant or something, it's going to be very, very hard. And non-profit media in India we have problems like you cannot have, you know, there is no FCRA, so you can't get foreign funding. It can't be applicable under CSR. So there's a huge vacuum in this. There is no money. Therefore, the initiative could be taken. One possible solution perhaps is that that research and scientific institutions can take initiatives, because you can get CSR money or foreign funding and reserve part of it for communication. For example, I mean, if you go to IMSC Math Science or NCBS or IISc, go to an Intel or a Microsoft, they are ready to give money, right, for projects. Can we reserve part of that for, let's say, fellowships, right? Reporting on, you know, whether it's environment or math or any topic that you're anyway working on, keep it for fellowships, for commissioning books. Unless we kind of, you know, create those kind of opportunities, it's going to be very, very hard to move ahead.
In the 90s, NCSTC started a large number of courses in science journalism. There is certificate courses, diploma courses, and even masters in science and technology communication in 2-3 places. And over time, this was started in the 90s, mid-90s, and it ran nearly 25 years. Most of them are now closing down. But in this time period, in this duration, a large number of people were trained. What went wrong? Why couldn't we create that many number of science journalists during that time, 25 years and 12 courses? So we need to look at what went wrong, and when we are looking at teachers and students and all that, make sure that the same mistakes are not committed.
Yeah, see, this funding is a very tricky issue. I think the moment you connect your writing to funding, I think it is another dimension of freedom comes into the picture. In fact, I briefly mentioned to you that nowadays our traditional way of publishing has to be changed. Earlier, publication is an expensive thing. Today, you have a blog, you create it, it's there on the cloud, you write. So what I find is the writing has to be thought in a different way. Then I think you have all the freedom now. I think you can start a blog tomorrow with no cost. The question of only your ability and your time and your commitment to the topic which you want to do it. So I foresee that this is an opportunity freeing up you to express yourself freely and without worrying about funding part of it. And let the funding be there, let the people who fund that, we need not worry about it. I think let it be there. I say that this is actually an opportunity coming to all of us, and that's happening to us. Every sort of information is being fed to you by your WhatsApp groups or Twitter or whatever, whether you like it or not. So why not we utilize the power of this to do the work which you like to do? I think this is where I think the funding can become an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I am not very sure I agree with this. I mean, I could agree with what you said if I were to apply it to myself, where I have a salaried job. And I think that's probably where a lot of such sentiments come from people who are sort of doing science communication on the side. But as long as that's sort of the picture that you have in mind, you can't expect people to be doing it from the outside. Or doing it full time. So I think the question is very valid. We do have to come up with a clear-headed idea of how, if we are expecting people who are outside this sort of small sphere of salaried science activity going to be involved, we do have to think about how it's going to be funded. I mean, my sense is that if there are concrete things to propose, there probably will be funding available. In fact, again, yesterday, talking to Vijay Raghavan on the sides of these sessions, he sort of emphasized that, if you're willing to do it and do it right, money will be available. So I think, but there is sort of this, interval where you sort of explore working together, come up with concrete ideas, and that's always something that's sort of, I think, everywhere done on a somewhat exploratory and uncertain basis in terms of but I think anything that's sort of has a serious term associated with it should have a clear-cut mechanism for funding. I'm not sure whether, so I think what you said concretely is, if I understood correctly, is whether part of the research funding can be dedicated to science communication. Doesn't exist as a system right now for Indian funding sources, as far as I understand. I know, for example, in the US, NSF asks you very specifically, what are you doing to disseminate your work? And of course, a lot of colleagues there get away by saying, we're training students. But it could be taken seriously and say, this is what we do, and then it probably will be then available, the funding will be available for science communication and dissemination. This is something that could probably be proposed as something that Indian funding organizations and institutions can do. But one danger with that kind of a system, and this also addresses to some extent what Madhu was asking, is if I think a lot of efforts in India to do something systemically on a large scale have failed because it just then becomes a box to tick. And there aren't enough people who are invested in doing it right. I don't know what the solution is, but it's certainly something to watch out for. You probably have something.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I completely agree with you, and that as scientists, I'm not a scientist, but if scientists expect good quality, well-reported journalism coming out, and they expect men and women to put their time and effort into such things, those men and women deserve to be compensated well for that, and for that money needs to come in. And again, if we want to propose structural changes, institutional level press offices are one thing, that's science communication. That's not specifically journalism, because then you operate under the constraints of being linked to that institution. For journalism, money needs to come in, but there you are competing with every other kind of news, and maybe we should also think about ways in which science journalism can be made profitable in a way that I think that will come with public engagement. More and more people are willing to listen to, engage with such science stories. More and more, I guess, newspapers will be able to turn it, but that may be a naive view, and I don't know the answer.
There are more questions. Yeah, could take 3 more questions, maybe. 3. Yeah.
So I'm Jatin Mehta. I'm a science communicator, and I also work at Team Indus. So I just want to share 2 thoughts, which are not explicitly relevant to this panel, but since this is the last session. So 2 things. One thing that has definitely come out is the need for scientists and science journalists to communicate on a regular basis, and not just when there is a story required or something of that sort. So one thing I would like to naively rather propose is emails are a wonderful way of asynchronous communication, and if that can be done in general, it brings out the nuances of the life of a scientist as well as those of journalists to each other, and it kind of can solve many problems that were discussed here. Also on that topic, so the last thing which I would request the organizers to maybe help doing is, a lot of us have been taking notes here. So if you see planetary science conferences or how astrophysics conferences go, at the end of such a conference, they make a report as to what was discussed, what were the issues, what were the solutions proposed, etc., which actually gives a contextual understanding and a reference for the future to build upon. So if any one of us, as in whoever is willing to share their notes, can contribute to a central portal, and maybe we can have a report that can actually, be more practical to do, instead of just discussing the problems and leaving it right there. So yeah, that's all.
I'm Krishna Swami. Just that, I mean, this obviously the thing that the outreach and communication is becoming important now is not in a vacuum. No, it is there in all places where in a democratic situation the public engagement is more and more, and obviously science and scientists, in order to survive, need to do the outreach. In fact, that's one of the things that has come in there was a EU, I mentioned the EU project on doing, looking at stereotypes on this. So one of the things which they come out to quote is, scientists do outreach or your science dies. So this is what they came up with, and this is happening all over the world. So I think it's a time where obviously the stress on science communication and science journalism increases. I mean, there's no solution, but I just want to add a cautionary note. You see, in India, DBT took a very far-seeing step in starting way back before other people started bioinformatics and biotechnology training programs, which really churned out lots of good students, right? But then that sort of hit the market, and then a boom, there was such a hype on the whole thing that now it's a bad word. No, and then DBT fortunately stepped in and said, look, no UG courses on biotechnology and so on. But the disaster is done. No, so I think now is the time when regulations have to be put in. You sort of should make sure that what courses are started are good, and not just every street corner they don't open up a shop and start doing it. So it's very necessary, given the Indian conditions. I think some regulatory things have to be put in at this, and maybe there's a good point to start off with. and evolve some regulatory mechanisms so that whatever courses and things come up, the quality gets maintained. I think that's important for future survival.
Hi, my name is Mohan. I'm from Indian Statistical Institute. I have two information-seeking questions. One is, are there any forums or mediums available for school teachers and college teachers to interact? It's two-way interaction with scientists. Throughout the two-day workshop, we didn't talk about science educators as such. Second question is, are there any courses or programs available for training in science illustration, not just journalism? Thanks.
I can answer one part of your question, that are there any forum available for science educators? So there's one on our website, indiabioscience.org. If you go to the discuss panel, there's a specific category for educators, just like I was showing a category for science communicators earlier today. So that's more for educators to talk to each other, but we encourage sharing of resources and getting them to interact with scientists and learn more. So that's one part. The second part about science illustration courses, I don't think there are specific courses available in India as of yet. There are courses on illustration and design available that are more general, but there are a few individuals who are active in this field. I know a few of them. So if you want to reach out to them directly, I can give you a few contacts if you would like. Sandhya is basically saying that HBCSE in Mumbai, that engages with both educators and scientists. So they have a program, as well as TIFR outreach. And IMSC.
Yeah, so I think there are a number of outreach programs where teachers are sort of the intended audience among, and the students from schools and so on. The JNC also has one. ICTS in Bangalore is running, NCBS and so on. But something that I see missing is actually something that's sort of intended to directly help the teachers with the difficulties in their teaching. I think that's probably not something that's possible to do on the scale that would be required. But sorry? So, yeah. But maybe what would be interesting to think about is the creation of resources that the teachers can themselves tap into, which we can put our heads together to. So one thing I wanted to say about your remarks is, I'm not sure the current interest, I mean, there's no doubt that there's currently an increased interest in science communication, but I'm not sure if it's a matter of anxiety. I mean, at least the way I was understanding it is somehow this has always been a good idea, which some people have been more committed to than others, like, you know, Tamil Nadu Science Forum. But it seems like it's an idea that whose time has come. And we're all...
Srikanth, I wanted to...
When the state gets involved, then that's a very different, things are facilitated in many ways. And then when the state retreats in a certain sense, there is a problem. But if I may just say something about social media, just a word of caution, because particularly with science or with the humanities, anything, the kind of deep reading, the arguments, the counter-arguments, the discussions that are possible, in a newspaper article or in an academic article. In social media, often it gets truncated. And what happens, what also happens is that attention spans, I mean, I know that it's a difficult thing to say, but you know, attention span, when you look at students particularly, when that is, after 700 words, your eyes glaze over, then there is a problem. Because an academic article would be about 20 pages and would be about at least 10,000 words. Yeah. Yeah.
See, I think the point which I was making is, Prasad, I don't know whether he's there in the audience, or he made this point. He had a compulsion to make a short article in the newspaper, but he used this blog
to give his opinion. What I'm saying is that these social media platforms are becoming available for you, where you can freely express without much the financial aspect of it. What I'm saying is, we have to make use of this. This is not instant social media, which I agree with you. A WhatsApp message, more than 1 or 2 sentences, is forgotten. I agree with. But what we are saying is that the newer facets are giving you an opportunity to explain at length. Because if it's a newspaper item, it is the number of words is fixed. He shared how 250 words he has to tell about the waste model. That is a challenge. But if he has to write a blog, he doesn't have a constraint. And that blog is meant for people who are interested in that topic. That means you are getting an opportunity to share your opinion at length, and that will have a controversy. That somebody will post something, then you have an opportunity to explain. What I'm asking is, let us start thinking solutions by making use of the newer facets that are becoming available, while instant messaging as a problem of evoking emotions and your reactions, that I'm not talking about. That we have to anywhere handle it, whether it's science or not science. Now the question is about the other media, which is what will be there. And Gautam, you want to ask that question by that student of mine? I think actually she's a student of us, just joined, and she's going to pursue her PhD in science communication. I think she somehow got connected to this, and one question maybe Shreya would be able to answer, I guess. That you read it out? I think.
Yeah, I read it out at the beginning. It's about an association of Indian science journalists, how that will help budding students and enthusiast writers.
Okay. First of all, I don't know if there exists an association of science journalists in India yet. Maybe there's an Indian Science Communication Society, but I don't know how active that is. In my opinion, if something like this exists where people can have regular meetings, interact, mentorship, this would be a great thing. And if we can build one, yeah, our forum is more of an informal thing, but yeah, that's sort of the idea that we want to build networks. And yeah, in my opinion, it would be a great thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Questions?
Yeah. In fact, I wanted to thank Shrikant Sastry for saying that you will be looking at building up a repository of science magazines. That is wonderful. That is great. And adding to what Dr. Nalini was saying about the social media being, giving out messages which are truncated. In fact, there is a fact which is contrary to what the popular perception is, particularly the Caravan, the long-form narrative journalism, in fact, found much traction compared to Outlook or India Today, thanks to digital, like what Dr. Sai Baba was saying. In fact, there are more and more people in regional languages. We are seeing, particularly in Tamil language, longer posts find more traction and more likes and more interactions compared to the shorter post, especially on social networks. That started happening big time, not just with the Caravan, also with digital entities like mine, Ipudu, or the Wire, Quanta. This all started happening. And adding to what Meera was saying, this entrepreneurial spirit of, now Nandita is here, passed out from ACJC, is now on entrepreneurial route. I am on entrepreneurial route. Now this whole idea of finding the people first and then technology, then money, that will probably help. Like we have the people here thinking about these things, and next identify the technology and money will follow. That attitude might help. So thank you for.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to respond to what you said, sir, because I make a distinction between digital media and social media. Digital media, I agree that you can read Caravan digitally. I mean, I read a lot online. But we are talking about social media, like we're talking about, I'm not just only talking about Twitter or, blogs, but because it is open to a lot more fake news because it's not monitored. I mean, when you talk about reading Caravan or The Guardian or The Economist online, it's very different. It's all monitored, but not social media. That was the distinction. Yeah.
So we've had a lot of questions and discussion about formal courses in science communication, illustrations, and so on. But then Dr. Sai Baba was just telling us about online resources for news, for blogging, and so on. Similarly, there are lots of online resources for people to learn by themselves. There are YouTube videos and a whole gamut of resources, and also several examples that you can read in The Guardian or The Caravan of good science journalism and bad science journalism, and sort of learn for yourself. Isn't that the way we should be going, rather than formal courses and sort of coercive state regulation, which was also brought up?
Yeah, and I will quickly respond. I think what I said is it's available. Now the question is connecting the interest versus what you need. And that marriage is what is required. Maybe the forums would help. And still in India, online learning has not really caught up. We still want to go to a formal way of learning. I think that's where I think that bridge, that gap we have to break. I just want to cover one other aspect, which I think the money, how it comes and all. In fact, there's one facet of science communication which interested us at NIAS is, if you just analyze in fact, we did a little preliminary survey of last 10 years of conflicts that our society has faced. Majority of them is connected with technology, newer technologies that are coming into our society. And the conflict is coming from the public protest. Is it because they understood the problem or not? And if you just do some hand calculation about the delay that got into implementing these projects vis-a-vis the money that you lost, there's a huge money that is going to be there. And this protest would happen, now it starts happening. Jokingly we say, on one road there will be protest for energy, and the second road there will be protest for not using the coal. I think this is where the society is leading to. I think in order to address such issues in a democratic society like ours, we need good communicators. And so maybe that would open up, and that would address the money, or that would give the money if you're ready to communicate things. So there is I think as somebody said, let us get equipped ourselves, and then I think say that we have the skills, we can address this, and then probably look for funding. I think that it should not be the other way, at least what I feel it should happen.
I just want to quickly, I just want to add to that. I think it cannot be the other way. But just to say something more concrete, I mentioned earlier in the context of science communication, I mentioned the outreach programs that we would like to hold through the Indian Academy of Sciences. I think these can be used to think through what would be worth doing on a larger scale, and to come up with concrete ideas on which could then be taken up with agencies that can support it or not. I mean, that they will decide. But I think there's also sort of, so I just want to say that at this level of sort of putting heads together and thinking, I hope, I mean, from these, from the side of the outreach programs at the Academy, there is money to support that level of activity, but then they can be used to think of what's worth doing and how to go about it, which could then be taken up for more serious funding elsewhere. So that I think it is also a matter of using the resources that are available in an appropriate way.
The last sentence from
Very last. Just to say that, if we start, I'm not quite sure, I think everything by the state is coercive, because a lot of science research is funded by corporates, and that can be equally pernicious. So we have to be a little cautious about, saying state is bad, corporates are fine. So, or you can say, I don't want anything, I wanted crowdfunding, fine. That's probably the best way, but just talking about a particular scientific temper. Yeah.
So with that, let's thank the panel. We thank Nalini for her job. So with that, we come to the end of this sort of fairly intense two-day meeting. Let me thank all of you for coming. There are a whole bunch of thanks in order. Rahul and I are very lucky to belong to a sort of far-seeing institution that supports us in pretty much every way possible. It indulges us when we want to think about the interface of science with society. It also indulges us when we want to do purely scientific meetings as well. I'm very happy that you may not have noticed, but around 12 of our colleagues have been in this room at various times. Many of them are not particularly into science communication, but they're here because they're interested in what's happening, and that's 20% of our faculty body, which is fairly large by any standards. So our institute has been supportive, and pretty much all our administration has taken care of the many things that you see here. And so the academy, who Rahul will thank separately, has also been a very important component of this. People have asked us many questions, where do we go from here, etc. We do plan to have a written document. The content and form of that is not clear at the moment, but it will certainly summarize some of the discussions that have happened so far around this meeting, and we will circulate it for your comments at some point. People have asked, is this one of a series of meetings? And the answer is that we didn't plan it to be so, but it probably is a good idea to do something like this once every year on a fairly regular basis. One thing we can be fairly sure of is that it's probably a bad idea to do it here again, because this is a meeting that should ideally move around India. It should not be confined to Bangalore, very importantly. It should move around Bangalore or Delhi, but it should move around to different places wherever there are different people who are interested in science communication in multiple languages and in multiple areas. The one piece of unsolicited advice I can give to anyone who's organizing this again is that you should try to do some things the way that we have done here. And that is to strip it down to the barest essentials. No inauguration, no lighting of lamp, no chief guest, none of this stuff. And as I pointed out to some people earlier, this was a conscious choice. And this is an example we would like to set for other institutions. We're interested not in who you are or what position you carry. We're interested in what you have to say and how that can be relevant to the way we think about science and science communication. So with that, let me hand this over to Rahul for other comments.
In addition to everything Gautam said, I want to say we planned this sometime in, I think, April this year, not realizing what a horrendous month August turned out to be for our institute. So I have to really doubly and triply thank our administration for putting up with this meeting despite a whole bunch of things they're going through at this time. In addition, this is 50% initiative of the dialogue effort of the Indian Academy of Sciences, which was started sometime last year. And two people who are not present here, Ramaswamy, the president, and Meva Singh, the editor of Dialogue, have been, Ram, especially from his position, supporting this initiative and giving suggestions and so on from a distance. We were hopeful till quite recently that Ram will show up here. There's also the staff at the academy, and in particular Mr. Mahesh, whom I've been in regular contact with over the last 2 weeks over various little things. And, in addition, of course, I'd like to thank every one of you for coming, some of you from quite long distances. And I'll finally hand it over to Amitabh, who's the editor of publications at the Academy, apart from being a very interesting scientist in his own right.
Thanks, Rahul. I just want to add to what Rahul and Gautam just said. Thank you to everybody who came and participated so actively in the discussions on behalf of the Academy and the Dialogue Initiative. I thank you, and finally and most strongly on behalf of the Academy and the Dialogue Initiative, I would really like to thank Rahul and Gautam for the fantastic job they have done, including not having a lighting of the lamp. Thank you.